All right, people. This is episode, I want to say, 7 after a good win tonight. As always, this space is brought to us by Focal, our good friends at Focal who create all the Mets bobbleheads for the Mets. Terry, John, welcome. Thank you so much for coming on tonight.
My pleasure.
Yeah, it's
So,
good. It's great to be on. Good win
uh,
today.
yeah, and Terry, we noticed you have this new podcast going on with John. You want to tell us a little bit about it before we get started? What
Yeah,
inspired you to
well,
do it?
I was minding my own business, and I got a message that John might have interest in doing a podcast. So we connected, and sounded like it might be fun for give me something to do for a while. So I signed on, and it's gotten off to a great start.
Yeah, for sure. You've had some amazing guests. I mean, David Wright. I mean, how could you not? I mean, he was the king of the crop growing up. Nothing better than him. Uh, I want to start it off with this past off season. I'm sure we'll get to reminisce in some of the great times that we've had, but this past off season, I was really curious to get your perspective on Carlos Mendoza coming in as a first time manager in New York. Yes, he had experience as a bench coach with the Yankees, but would you tell him to prepare, and what are the expectations, coming to New York instead of like, going to a team like, I don't know, Milwaukee?
Yeah, yeah. Do you want to do it now?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
I mean, yeah. I mean, when you come to New York, you better buy into expectations. I don't care what the situation you're coming in. I don't care what your payroll is. It's New York, and your fan bases create expectations. And so, it always starts in the wintertime. But when you go to spring training and you're talking about, oh, we're a good team, we're going to win, we're going to win, we're going to win. Well, guess what? You've created expectations. So, instead of letting it play out, you got to be careful in the New York market of just coming in and saying, hey, look, we're going to put the team together. We're going to try to, we're going to compete. And if we have to make adjustments as we go, we will, because everybody, I mean, due to what the media has written all year long, where, they're bringing in David Stearns, they're not going after big money guys anymore this year until, the Verlander, Scherzer money's off the board. That's already out there. So be very careful about, you got to be very careful about what you're saying. And I thought Carlos handled it fine, but, because he bought in and said, hey, look, I'm in New York. We're expecting to win. We're expecting to win. But now you got to be accountable for whatever happens.
Terry, Dan Bartels, WFUV Sports, thank you for being on MetCast. We can't thank you enough.
It's my pleasure.
In talking about Carlos Mendoza still, being a former manager yourself, what are some typical day-to-day things that normal fans wouldn't realize that Carlos is dealing with? Like, a typical fan, at least from my perspective, would think the bullpen is the hardest thing for a manager to manage during these times. Like, from your perspective, who has been a manager before, what is kind of the day-to-day stuff that are probably driving Carlos Mendoza crazy right now?
Well, and again, the game has changed since I've managed, but you've got so many now performance enhancement coaches. You've got the medical staff. There's 12, 11 people in that training room. I had three. And so, they're coming in. You got people saying, hey, look, this guy needs a day off. This is a bad matchup, because your analytics guys are coming in saying this is a bad matchup for this guy, even though you think in your heart, hey, look, he's swinging good. This is I don't want in the big leagues, when guys are swinging good, you don't want to take them out of a game. So all that
Right.
stuff that crosses his desk is not like just walking in and having a gut and saying, here's my lineup today. There's a lot more parameters that you have to face now. That come in. By the way, guys, there's so much more than just the game itself that comes across your desk. It's PR stuff. It's community relations things that pop up. There's interviews with writers that you got to deal with. So you just can't concern as a manager. You just can't say, well, I'm just worried about my team today. You've got to budget your time for other things.
Terry, as a follow-up, are these things good for baseball?
Well, that's where the game is today. So
Right.
I mean, I don't know how to answer it. I mean, I was very, very lucky. Sandy and I talked, I mean, like nonstop about different things. Analytics were starting to come on the scene. Sandy Alderson had never, ever told me who to play and who not to play, where to hit somebody in the lineup, where not to hit somebody in the lineup. Never. So, I listened to him. I took his advice. Gathered all the information, but I went on what my gut was and how I was born and raised in the game. And then I went with what I thought was my best lineup night after night.
Terry, how does that relate to today's game? Considering, you have, believe it or not, you have young people like David Stearns in front offices. Some of these people, like the old school guys, like I remember Buck talking about it when he was on Fox, saying you got these people who never even played the game or watched the game printing out a lineup and putting it on a manager's desk, all these analytical people. How does how does that affect today's game? Does it hurt you? How do you manage a clubhouse? Because if your players are coming to you and saying, "Well, coach, I'm on fire. I want to get moved up in the order," and he has a lineup printed out on his desk, how do you manage those relationships?
Yeah, I think because the game has evolved that way in the minor leagues, I think a lot of these guys now have come up through the minor leagues realizing that's part of it. Where the veterans today, I mean, the Max Scherzers of the world today, you go to take him out after 75 pitches today because the data tells you that that's when he's losing his stuff. You got a fight on your hands. But a young pitcher today that said, "Well, that's what I watched minor leagues last year. I saw a game one night in AAA where a starting pitcher was throwing two hits, and I mean they weren't even good hits. Two hits, punched out six guys, had 73 pitches, and he came out after 5 and 2/3 innings and was ahead in the game because that's what hey, you're getting through the third time in the lineup, and that's when damage may be caused. Well, I learned a long time ago by some great pitchers. Chuck Finley was the guy who brought it to my attention. He said, Terry, there's nights it's easy, and there's nights it's hard. The nights it's easy, I don't care if I throw 130 pitches. My curveball's working, my split's working, I'm locating my fastball, I'm striking guys out. That's easy. There's other nights where I got to get out of the jam in the first. I got to get out of the jam in the second. I look up in the third and I got 65 pitches and I'm out of gas. So, you got to be able to use your gut once in a while and let the other team dictate, hey, when the end is coming. There's so many games. I had a situation with Seth Lugo one night. He was absolutely dominating the game. And all of a sudden he got to 75 pitches and, hey, look, he's got 75 pitches. This is when the damage comes. Hey, not this night, not this particular night. It's working. And so, that part of the game is gone now. It's all, hey, it's etched in stone. This guy's got to come out. And I've seen players come out and saying, well, the data says this. And that's where the media side of things today, they'll question manager, well, why'd you take him out? Well, you know who you need to bring in to answer that question are the analytics guys. Let them sit down at the table and say, hey, look, we've got data to prove this was the right decision. Whether it backfires or not, or it's the right, this is what our data proves. And that's where managing today has become so hard.
Joey, go ahead.
Hey, Terry, how you doing, buddy?
Good.
Big fan, bro. Big fan, Terry. I mentioned your name a lot in these spaces, especially when the team's struggling and the players are struggling. The manager never says anything. I mean, that's the one thing about you that I love, the fact that you made these guys accountable. It's a lost start today. No one does anymore. I mean, these guys would go 0 for 50 and nothing's ever said. But I know when the guys were struggling, you basically said, "Look, these guys can't get it done. I'm gonna put guys in there that can get it done." And it's never said anymore, and it's just so frustrating because as fans, we love to hear that, because in our jobs, if we don't get the job done, we get reprimanded, by our boss. And in baseball, I know these guys are making $30 million a year, but it's nice when the manager will say basically, we'll make these guys accountable, which, like I said, is a lost art today. But question I have for you, Terry, is what's going on with the like last year with all the beanings the Mets took, and now you saw this year early on with McNeil with the slide with Reese Hoskins. That game the guy threw behind Reese Hoskins, Ramirez. He gets thrown out of the game. I mean, like last year, it was embarrassing how many times Pete. I think Pete led the majors in getting hit by pitches last year, and we as a team, the Mets definitely did also. I mean, like, how as a manager, how do you police it? How do you like handle it now going forward? I mean, I know it's a touchy situation. I mean, years ago they would just retaliate these guys, but nowadays, I mean, all these players are friendly. They all have the same agents. I mean, with all the money that's being made. I mean, how do you, as a manager, like, I mean, last year Buck basically all he did was make faces. He never went out and did anything. I mean, how do you police it? I mean, that's going like in this day and age in baseball.
Well, that actually is a really good question because for years we handled that. Now it's a little different, but it's one of the things. I watched the games last summer a lot, and now you look at a situation. Guys, for a long, long time, the pitchers always had something on their fingers to be able to command the baseball. They don't have that anymore. So now these guys are all throwing 100 miles an hour. And by the way, with the new launch angles, where are they pitching? They're all pitching up in the strike zone. And where's Pete vulnerable? Up and in. You got to pitch him up and in. So now you've got guys throwing up and in to your power hitter. And by the way, remember, he's got a mask on, he's got an elbow pad, he's got a wrist, he's got a hand guard, he's got shin guards. Years ago, guys didn't have that stuff. And so, but in order to get Pete out, you had to come in there. Well, if you don't have the ability to really command your fastball in there, you're going to hit somebody. And that comes with it. Now, how to change it? You know what? Once in a while, you may have to go after their star because Pete's a star. And I will tell you something, the star pitchers, the star players in the game have no problem going to the pitching staff and saying, listen, I'm taking the beating for you guys pitching in on these guys and hitting them. Knock it off. Because if you want me in the lineup, I told Ken Griffey this years ago. I told Ken, you can stop this. All you got to do is say, hey, you guys need me in the lineup. And one of these times we're going to hit somebody on purpose, and I'm going to be the guy who pays the price for it, and you need me in the lineup. So, and I don't think it should change. I'm not going to ever critique Buck. I think he's one of the best managers, if not the top manager in the game, strategy-wise. But, again, the game has just changed, and in order to play in the game today, you have to change. And so I thought I really thought the way Pete handled a lot of it. Hey, look, he flipped his bat off the side and he went to first base. And that's what the old guys used to do. They knew maybe there was a situation they knew they were going to get pitched in, and if they hit them, they just moved to first.
Yeah, well, last year, if you remember that when Charlie Morton hit Pete, that derailed our season. I mean, he was out like four. He missed a lot of time there, and it was right when the Mets were like kind of playing well, and I don't know. To me, I thought that was on purpose, that pitch anyway. But I mean, it's just that he's our star player. You lose your star player for more than a month or so, it ruins your season. So that's why it's like you said, it's like years ago they used to just take it. I mean, the other guy would hit the other guy, and he'd walk to first base, and that was it. It was like that's the way the game was played, but it's such a different game
It
now.
is a different game, and that's what the adjustments you have to make as a player. I mean, again, we just talked about it. Where do we see Pete Alonso most vulnerable? Up and in, and so that's where they're going to pitch him. And and by the way, I wish the heck years ago when guys were putting a little something on their fingers to control the baseball or add a little. Guys were still hitting 40 and 50 home runs. Guys were still hitting 330. It wasn't like nobody was getting any hits. So the complaints about, Garrett Cole putting something on his fingers to get a better breaking ball, he's already got a great breaking ball. But that doesn't change the fact that he's got better command of his stuff. You don't get nervous in the batter's box. And Pete's one of those fearless guys. He's going to guard the home. He's going to guard the inside part of the plate. He's not going to back off, so he's going to get hit once in a while.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just a heads up, I see that people are requesting to come up. We'll bring you one at a time up to ask your questions. Dan, you have one more really quick, and then we go to Petey.
Yeah, sure. Terry, I was just wondering, Doc Gooden brought up something during his jersey retirement Zoom this week. I wanted to get your opinion on it. He said teams in the 80s and 90s would do more things together. Like nowadays, it just seems like two guys will go out to a restaurant here and another guy will go out with his wife here. And there was really no sense of like camaraderie as there was in the 80s and the 90s. So I was wondering, during either your 2015 run in the playoffs or any time with the Mets during your tenure, did you do anything to build chemistry, and did it work?
Well, a lot of that stuff the players do because the manager and the coaches really don't, during the season because there is a little bit of a separation that you really don't want to do a lot with the players. We did a lot in spring training to form camaraderie. We had card games every Sunday night. We had, poker games, and we bowled together. We did stuff. But during the season, I will tell you, I can't tell you how many nights I'd hear about 6 and 7 guys were going to dinner here, or they're going to dinner there. And what they did is we had a tremendous veteran leadership. And so one of those guys, it might be David one night, it might be, Dan Murphy one night, it might be Curtis one night, taking 6 or 7 guys and go out and talk baseball at dinner. And yeah, they did. That was that was something that happened all the time. You could get on a plane and walk to the back of the plane, and there were these groups of guys, whether they were playing cards or just talking baseball, but there were 6 and 7 and 8 guys. There wasn't just two. And I think when you talk about clubhouse chemistry, that's what made us so successful in 2015 is our clubhouse were all together.
Thank you, Terry.
Petey, go ahead, my man.
Thanks, Ray. Hey, Terry, how are you? I met you at the
Good.
Queens Baseball Convention this year.
Oh,
Great
yeah,
time.
great.
Yeah, it was me and that guy. I don't know if you recall. Everybody was huddled around us. We asked you about the Noah Syndergaard pitch. It was a pretty cool conversation. Terry, I got two quick things. One, I'm a longtime season ticket holder, and Terry, in 2015, the Friday that we won that game, the only game we won, it was almost the best day of my life. I found out I was having a son that morning, and
Oh, that's
and
tremendous.
then and then I went to the World Series. Terry, I don't know if I've been to a lot of football games, but that atmosphere that night when Noah threw ahead of whatever the guy's name was, that was an
Escobar.
incredible,
Yeah,
yeah, that was
Escobar.
just
Yeah.
an incredible moment. But if you
Yeah.
could describe that feeling, and then one more question I have. I'm a big Jose Reyes fan, and I don't condemn what he did, but I believe Jose Reyes belongs in the Mets Hall of Fame. Can you comment on that if you can?
Yeah. Well, first of all, with Noah, there's no question about Noah. When he threw over Escobar's head, and of course, the Royals were screaming and hollering from their bench. I'll tell you what, he fired up our club. He fired our team up. You know what? And that was for him. That was a tone. He set the tone. Hey, look, we're not going to just sit back. We know you guys are good, but you know what? We're pretty good too. And so when he did that, you could just see the entire guys rose to their feet and the dugout saying, "Yeah, okay, that's perfect." Because again, the next day it was pretty funny. The next day I was talking to some of the Royals during batting practice, and they said, "Hey, that was that was bullshit what he did last night." I said, "Well, why didn't you go out and do something?" And one of the guys said, "Do you see how big that guy is? I'm not going out there." So and so Noah
Yeah,
set the
Terry,
tone
you
for that.
told us that. You said it was Mike
Yeah,
Moustakas,
yeah,
I think.
exactly. So, but in the case of Jose Reyes, let me tell you, in the next few years, Jose Reyes' name is going to be evolved as time to retire his number. What he did for all those years with the Mets, the energy he brought to the team, the offensive threat he was on the bases at the plate. Yeah, I mean, okay. Once in a while, a guy in our game today in sports today, hey, look, it's all about chasing the dollar, and this guy had a chance to go make a lot of money, a ton of money. That's okay. You tip your hat to him. He came back and played like mad for me. When he came back after we brought him in 2016, he was partially responsible for us going to the playoffs. We were short players. David was hurt. Jose came in and played third base brilliantly at times. He gave us a great leadoff hitter when he needed to play, but his leadership in the clubhouse, especially with the Latin players, you can't replace that.
Really quick,
Thanks.
Terry, do you think we'll live in
Thanks,
a
Ray.
world when Jose Reyes and David Wright get in on a veterans committee?
Absolutely. I don't think there's any question. I don't know if you mean in the Hall of Fame.
Yes,
I,
sir.
I certainly think David will. I'm not sure what the numbers for a guy like Jose would have to be, but certainly his name will be mentioned. I don't think there's any question.
Wow, who would have thought? Gianna, one of our writers here at Metcast, Harry. What's going on?
Hey Terry, I just have two quick questions for you. As a former manager, after obviously a rough start to the season, what would you say to the clubhouse right now? How do you keep them together? And we talk about veterans a lot. Do you think the Mets lack like a veteran and a true leader in this clubhouse?
Well, to answer the first part of your question, it's 162 games, and they played 50, or they got 158 games left, or whatever it might be right now. You know what? Just keep playing, keep showing up. It's going to get better. Everybody, and it's been brought up, everybody in baseball is going to have a downtime. And by the way, you can look back in recent history. The downtimes when they're early in the season are a heck of a lot better than their downtimes later in the season, because as you build and it gets late in summer and guys start to get tired and all of a sudden your momentum's building like we did in 2015, the other teams they're tired, and you can beat up those teams, which we did. I'm not concerned at all about the Mets. I like their team. I like their lineup. And I think as guys start to get healthy, certain guys, Senga and a couple other guys, and by the way, a lot of guys get off to slow starts offensively, but the back of their baseball card will dictate what to kind of to expect. So you're going to have guys pick it up a little bit. Now, on the front of the second part of your question, I don't know the Mets clubhouse. I haven't been there in a long time, but they really do have some great veteran guys on that club. I look at Lindor, I look at Pete Alonso, I look at Brandon Nimmo, and you know what? Hey, look, especially those guys, they weren't there in 2015, but they were there 2 years ago when things were really good. So they've been on the high side and the downside. And the one thing they have to understand, you've got to maintain that constant attitude. Hey, look, never get too high when things are good, and don't get down when things are bad. You got to show up every day and and do the job. And the minute you start to have self-doubt is when you're going to fail. And the fear of failure has ruined a ton of players. And this is where your veteran leadership comes in. And I think the Mets this past year have gone out and got themselves some leadership, some veteran leadership, Manaea and a number of other guys who are going to, I think, hopefully keep that spirit in that clubhouse up.
Hey Terry, I got another question for you. Going back to Game 5, 2015 World Series, that
Was
ninth
I
inning.
there? Was I there in Game 5?
Terry, as a fan watching that game, I'm praying. I'm saying, please, God, let Terry keep him in the game. Do not. I mean, the moment was one of the great moments. I know. I know we didn't win the game or the series, but just that moment, that ninth inning, the crowd. I wasn't at the games, watching it on TV. Was one of the most electric moments. Him coming out that ninth inning. I just said, please, Terry, just let him go the ninth inning. Every fan wanted him in that game. You know what I'm saying? Nobody wanted you to take him out of that game. My question to you is, as a manager, you have to make tough decisions and you have to live with them. How, when you look back, are you okay with that, or do you ever think about maybe I should have taken him out? I mean, how do as a manager, I must be tough to
Yeah,
you have to always make tough
and you're right.
decisions.
That's another very, very good question. First of all, during the season of 2015, we ran into a situation where I had all of my starting pitchers. I had innings limits on everybody but Bartolo. They had innings limits, and there was a time they were pitching so good they were giving me 6 and 7 and 8 innings every time out. And I'm looking at this and I said, "There's no way we can get through the season with these guys keeping them under their innings limits." So I decided I wanted to go to a 6-man rotation. I thought, well, man, we got enough pitchers. We got some good depth. Maybe I can add a sixth guy, and I can monitor some of their workload. Well, the first guy who stood up and said, "No, I want the baseball," was Matt Harvey. The first guy, without a question. Now, later that summer, he had made a statement, and I don't think he got the best advice, but he made a statement that he was going to, he didn't want to pitch too much because he was worried about perhaps getting hurt due to overuse.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, guess what?
Yeah.
I talked with Matt at length and said, okay, I get that. And it was 5 days later, 6 days later, he pitched against the Yankees. And, that Subway Series was huge. And Matt was pitching great, 5 innings, like 2 or 3 hits. So I took him out of the game because he had reached a count or an innings limit count where I said, "Hey, look, we're going to be in the postseason. I'm going to need this guy." And the next day, he walked in my office. He looked me in the eye, walked up to my desk, and he said, "I want the baseball. Listen, I don't care what anybody. I want to pitch. I don't want to go through what I did yesterday." And I said, "You got the ball, son." And so when it came to that
Wow.
night, Game 5, here's a guy who stepped up and said, "Give me the baseball." And I was going to take on. And by the way, Jurice Familia saved 52 games for us. And he's out there
Yep.
warming up in the bullpen. But you know what? Once in a while, you have to give your players, you got to pat them on the back and reward them. And I said, "You know what, Matt? You're right. Go get him." And that's why I sent him back out there. And to this day, I have absolutely no regrets at all by sending him back.
Well, it's like, what's that famous thing? Red Shandies and Bob Gibson. I had a commitment to his something when he left Gibson in the game. He wasn't going to take him out because he just, that's the guy wanted the ball. He wanted to stay in the game. I mean, and yeah, I mean, as I said, as a Mets fan, we were, that moment was. I know we didn't win and everything else, but it was so electric. I don't. I mean, like I said, I wasn't at the game,
Yeah.
but I mean, it was so loud. I mean, when he walked out of that dugout I get chills
I
thinking
know. Well,
about
let
it.
me tell you, I was
But
at the game, and I'm down here in Florida, and I had a guy walk up to me one day, and he said to me, "I would have taken Matt Harvey out." And I said, "Okay, that's great." I said, "But I got 48,000 people who disagree with you." So you know what I mean? It's when you were
exactly.
there, you're right. That
48,001.
atmosphere was so electric. I couldn't have taken him out.
Oh,
What a great
unbelievable.
story that
Unbelievable.
is. That is legendary when it comes to Mets history. We'll keep it running. Well, Zach and Tony. Zach, what's going on, my man?
Hey guys, what's going on? Hey, thanks Terry for coming on. Really, really appreciate it. It's awesome to talk to you. I got a two-part question on some history. What is, and you don't got to say the 2015 run, what's one of your fondest memories of being a Mets manager? And then my other question is there anybody coming up the pipeline that you're really excited to see get to the big leagues?
You know, I wish I could tell you what my number one thrill was with the New York Mets. You know, when I stepped down as the manager, I said, you know, here I've got this. I had this dream job managing in New York City that doesn't get any better than that. I had a batting champion, a Cy Young Award winner, a no hitter, numerous All Stars. I mean, it couldn't get better than that. So I really wish I could tell you the one thing. I mean, I'm sitting here the day when Jose, you know, when he came in that morning and said, "Hey, look, if I get hit my first time up, I'm going to win the batting champion." You know, and that's enough. That's good for me. And I said, you know what? He's earned this. You know, I watched Ari Dickey, you know, win the Cy Young. And by the way, he was ready to come back on 3 days rest if he didn't win that 20th game. You know, things that people didn't realize. This guy, what a competitor he was. You know, Johan Santana, 3 innings, I walked down to him, dying for him to say, "Hey, look, I'm out of gas." Absolutely not coming out of the game when he pitches a no hitter. And then 2015, and actually one of the biggest moments was in 2016 when you know we fought and fought and fought and clawed our way back to get into the playoffs with Asdrubal Cabrera's big home run against the Phillies that kind of vaulted us into the playoffs. I mean, I can't tell you the tremendous thrills, and I managed in other places with really, really good teams, but nothing was as exciting as managing the New York Mets.
That's awesome. That's awesome to hear. But yeah, and then the second part of the question: anybody you're super excited to come up to the big leagues that you got your eye on, or you're
Well, you
hoping
know,
turns
I
good?
saw them. I went over and watched some of the minor leagues. Andy Green's, you know, played for me, and I've known Andy for a long time. So he asked me to come out to the minor league complex, and I don't go out and watch many games. But he was telling me about some of this pitching they have, and I'm a big believer in pitching. And I know we got the Acuna kid and the Gilbert guy, and you know, I hope. And by the way, I hope they do great. But I'm so excited to see some of this young pitching come up and get a chance because you know I remember the time when we brought Noah or we brought Jake, and then we brought Harv, and then we brought Noah, and then Zach Wheeler, and I mean that's the future. And I'm just hoping that someplace here in the next few months we start seeing some of that young pitching get to the big leagues.
Terry, did you have an idea that Jake was going to be this good, this dominant, one of the greatest of all time?
No, no, I thought Jake was going to be a great pitcher, but you got to remember, you know, he was 94 to 97 pitching for me. But you know, he used his two seamer a little bit more. He had a pretty good curveball. But now, when times changed and it was about pitching upstairs, pitching high in the strike zone, throwing hard, he could do it. And so he changed what he did. He changed who he was when I had him to become this dominant pitcher. But he's also been hurt for 3 years. And you know, and I love him to death. You know, nobody competed better than Jake DeGrom. I'm going to go back to Game 5 in Los Angeles. Nobody. You can't name two guys who walked into a game and didn't have very good stuff at the start of a playoff game and still gave you 7 innings like Jake DeGrom did. Unbelievable. So you know, I'm very happy for him. But I will tell you, we were blessed with some of that young pitching. And I just wish there was some way that we could have retread everything to get a chance to see those 5 guys in the rotation for more than one turn through it, which is all we ever had because those were 5 dominant young arms.
Go ahead, Tony.
Hey, thanks, Terry. I do have a question, but I need to say something. It was Yankees Mets when Tejada was called out at second after the umpire called him safe.
Yeah.
You came out there, that place was shaking. We thought it was like Stone Cold Steve Austin when you came out of that dugout and you ripped out first base. That was one of the best moments I've ever seen live. Just thank you for that. The fire was always there. But when you came out of there, that place went electric. We were so pumped for you to just give them the business.
If you remember, I mean, there was no replay back then.
Yeah.
And so the umpire called him safe and then called him out. I walked down. I said, "What was that? You can't do that." And he said, "Well, I missed the call." I said, "Too bad. Deal with it." You know what the hell? And then I get kicked out of the game, and I'm walking off, and they're changing the bases. And first base was laying there, and I kicked it, and I thought I broke my foot, but I knew I couldn't limp, so I had to keep walking like everything was good.
Oh, that was great. It was great. But anyway, Terry, I just wanted to ask you a question about Cespedes. We were hemming and hawing for him to come to the team. He was right there at the trade deadline. You guys got him. I know he's a weird dude. I'm not going to get into him falling off his horse or whatever. Not any of that. Just what was it like coaching him? Like, was he a different guy? Like, how was he in the clubhouse as a player? Like, who do you compare him to? Things like that.
Well, guys, to be honest, I actually have dinner with Cespedes today. He lives down here in St. Lucie with me, not with me, but near me. So we once in a while we have dinner. And I asked him one day when we were having dinner, I said, "So why didn't you want to be the best player in baseball?" And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, who do you think the best player in baseball is?" He said, "Mike Trout." I said, "Really?" I said, "Can Mike Trout throw with you?" He goes, "Well, no." I said, does he have more power than you?" "No." I said, "Is he faster than you?" "No." "Is he a better hitter than you?" "No." I said, "So, okay, I know you played left field, but you played center field. So, maybe we'll give him a little tip of the cap that he might be a better center fielder. But this guy, you got 4 better tools than this guy." I said, I don't understand, in my opinion, you should have been best player in the game. And, I can't get in his mind, but this guy was such a difference maker on the club. So, and I will tell you a story. When we got him in 2015, we had a couple of bad games in a row or something. And I walked in the clubhouse after we lost maybe the second or third game, and we were in a hot streak. And I told the guys, I said, "Turn the music on." And I said, "Hey, look, okay, we've lost a couple games in a row. It's part of the game. Turn the music on." So I walk in my office, and Seth is right behind me, and he said, "You don't care if we have music?" I said, "No." The next day, we had 2 of the biggest music speakers you have ever seen in your life that Seth bought and put them in the corner of the clubhouse. And we started winning like crazy. Just like crazy. And they would pump that music up. I couldn't hardly walk in the clubhouse because I'm too old. My ears were going to pop. But that was Seth. He would do anything to be a good teammate. And so, it was really fun to watch him play. I loved it. I still love him today. I love being with him today. He's a very, very sharp guy. He's really, really involved now in trying to get Cubans and a better chance to get to the United States. So, but he was a unique guy without a question. And again, another guy. I think all of a sudden the injuries caught up with him. But great player.
Thanks, Terry. Appreciate it.
Macho, go ahead.
Thanks for having me up here. Hey, Terry, man, you've given me a lot of great memories. I appreciate your effort, the fire, and your soul. I'm only 37, but I got this, this philosophy on New York sports. You have to be able to mimic the attitude of the city to be successful in New York. I was wondering if you agree with that statement. And I just want to thank you again for everything you've done in this organization and the excitement you
Thank you
brought.
very much. And by the way, I totally agree with you on that statement. Especially the New York Mets. The Yankees are kind of like the big money team and, all the celebrities and stuff. The New York Mets, we are a working class team. And our fan base is based on hardworking, people that work, love the game, but yet, every day just work their butts off to come to a game. And I totally agree with that. And that was one of the things not just me, David Wright used to tell, "Hey, look, guys, the fans that come to watch us play, they want to see effort. They want to see I mean, hard baseball because this is how they live their life. And I think I totally agree with what you're saying. And I always hoped that maybe that was how the kind of the team that we put on the field was something that our fans like to see.
Oh, that's awesome. Guys, a reminder, John and Terry have a new podcast on YouTube. Give Terry and John a follow. They put out some amazing content with their guests that they have. Way better than what we have here, I'll tell you that.
Well, if I can interject, I mean, we dropped a new episode tomorrow, and Terry was able to get Tom Hallion for those two guys to get together on the new podcast. It was amazing to watch the taping and to be part of the taping yesterday, and it drops tomorrow. Terry, how was that getting to hang out with Tom Hallion and watch that video yesterday?
You know, John, one of the things that was amazing, you know, the confrontation Tom and I had in 2016 took place. Do you know in 2017 he never umpired one of our games? That was amazing. And so for the first time after all this broke years later, to be able to sit and talk to Tom about it and hear his perspective on it. I mean, gosh, you know, that was what I wanted to hear. Obviously, everybody wanted to hear where our ass in the jackpot came from, which he gave a great story to tell about it. But I always wanted to know his perspective on the game itself that night. And so to be able to sit there and listen to what he thought, what they went on in the umpire's room to prepare for that game, and then, you know, again, he handled the situation as he said during the podcast. You know, he said, you know, he's watching it again. I'm getting a little worked up. Well, guess what? So was I. So, well, you know, welcome to the crowd. But it was a very, very fun episode, and I have a lot of friends down here. And John, I can't wait to tell them tomorrow that hey, it's going to come out tomorrow because they are dying to see this.
Yeah,
Everyone in this space is absolutely.
Hey Ray, I got
Go ahead, Joe, really quick, and then we'll get to Craig.
Hey, Terry, go back to the 15 World Series, Game 1, ninth inning, 1-run lead. Familiar on the mound, 52 saves that year. You know, he was unbelievable against the Cubs and the Dodgers. He put, it saves. You know, that Gordon home run. I mean, I look back at that. My God, we had so much momentum after sweeping Chicago. If we win that game, I think it's turns. I mean, I think it could go the other way where the Mets win 5 games. It's amazing how fragile it is when you're in a game like that on the road. You win that game, you're up 1-0. You stole that game. Now right. How do you feel about that? Looking back,
Well,
that home
you
run.
know, again, it's baseball. I had no problem bringing Jurice in that game. Number one, he didn't give up home runs. I mean, you look back over the entire season, and we all go back to the Justin Upton homer that he hit after the rain delay one
In the
day.
rain. Yeah.
But Jurice didn't give up home runs. He had that tremendous sinker. So nobody was more shocked that he gave up a home, especially in Kansas City to a left-handed hitter to left center. I mean, that's a big part of the park. So we were shocked by it. The issue came is that their bullpen was so good, you know, especially late in the game. When we lost that lead, boy, it was tough to catch up. And yeah, I think you're right. I mean, we had the lead in 4 of the 5 games in the World Series, and
Yep.
you know, we just couldn't we couldn't hold them. And but I will tell you, I will go to my grave with this. One of the things that happened after we swept the Cubs, we sat for 5 days. And in
That's
our
right.
energy, in our that adrenaline that we had after we swept the Cubs, it just all of a sudden, I mean, you're sitting there with nothing to do but take batting practice and face your own pitchers for batting practice, kind of thing. And I called Jim Leland, I called Tony La Russa, I called Joe Torre. Hey, what can I do to make sure we stay prepared? And none of them said. As a matter of fact, Joe had the best answer. He said, just make sure your closer's ready to pitch. I said, well, you had Mariano Rivera, so,
Exactly.
but that's what it was. Murph was so red hot, and he sat there for 5-6 days not playing, and so I think we lost a little bit of that edge, and certainly came back to hurt us.
Yeah, Cespedes too. Got
Exactly,
cold. Yeah,
Yep.
exactly.
that
Go ahead,
happened. Yeah.
Craig.
Hey, Terry, thanks for being here. Just wanted to hear a little bit about the role of a manager on a day-to-day level. So, in terms of holding meetings with teams, is that something teams hear from the manager for an extended period every day? And then I also wanted to just hear a little bit about the helplessness of the manager when the manager sort of just feels the most isolated from a team and from ownership. And then if you could just maybe talk a little too, when a manager has to sort of defend himself to ownership, and specifically if you think Buck knew that his job was done at September of last season, or if that comes as a total surprise. If you could just speak a little bit about that. Really appreciate you being here. Thanks for that run in 2015.
Well, those are all hard questions to answer. And first of all, the one thing managers can't do is have meetings, too many meetings. Anytime the manager has a meeting, it's because of something negative going on. Now, if you're going to do a pregame meeting to prepare for a club, you let your hitting coach have the meeting with the hitters, talk about the opposition pitching. You let your pitching coach talk to the pitchers about the opposition offense. Your catchers are involved. But when the manager gets involved in the meeting, it's because something's not right. Something's it's gone haywire. Otherwise, the manager kind of stays out of the way and just talks to his players on a daily basis, more one-on-one than as a team. But when you have a team meeting, and they get tired of hearing the manager. And that's why, one of the things, when I named David Wright the captain, I knew David wasn't going to hold a lot of meetings. But when he had something to say, his teammates listened, and that's a bigger than having the manager. This is not football. We don't play once a week to where they need a pep talk. If things aren't going good, hey, hold a meeting. But these guys are used to being in the action every day. I'm not sure what the second part. I can't remember all the second part of your question, but again, when you're managing, I think your job is very simple, and that is prepare your players to be successful. And when you write a lineup, you put a lineup out there every day that you think is going to be better than the other team. And if you're going to take someone out of the game, one of the things that I always believed in, if I was going to give someone a day off tomorrow, I knew that the day before, and I would tell them the day before so they could prepare to have that day off. Instead of springing on them, hey, they show up at the ballpark the next day because they're expecting to play, and now they're not in there. That doesn't fly very good. As far as Buck, I don't think Buck had any thought that he wasn't coming back. The job he did in 22 was off the charts great. Off the charts great. And, things happened in 23. Hey, that's why the game is what it is, and that's why I consider it a great game. There's no guarantees. And so he got some guys hurt. Some guys didn't play well. And I've said it for years and years. You know what? If you're going to be successful in the big leagues, your star players better play good first. Secondly, someone's got to surprise you. You've got to have a surprise in your team. Maybe it's a pitcher that wins 15 games that you think, oh, geez, if he wins 10 or 12 games, we're good. Maybe it's a hitter, maybe it's a guy like Pete Alonso, who you say he's going to hit 40. Well, maybe this year he hits 70. A surprise, something that you didn't have. That's how some of these teams really, make a difference. And all of a sudden last year, things didn't work out for Buck on any phase of it all. But make no mistake about it, he was the same manager he was in 22. So, and we all go back to think, hey, look, when things don't go good, it's the manager's accountable. Buck knows that. I know that. And we take it because that's what we signed up for. So I just hope that I know Buck. I talk to him a lot. And, he just shreds it off and says, it's what it is. But certainly the Mets were lucky to have him.
Terry, let me ask you a quick one before we get to Giants. Everybody always says that it's a 162 game season. It's a long season, but think about it. We went into that last series with the Braves and lost every game that cost us the division. You win one game, it's different. So maybe think about it. That probably ended up playing a role in Buck potentially losing his job the following year. Because if you win the division, things might be totally different. So do you take that mindset of when guys are struggling early, well, it's a long season, or are you more pressed in April and May to get things right away?
Well, first of all, you want to be consistent. You don't want to just have 2 good months. You want to, I used to say, hey, look, every month I want to be 5 games over 500 every month. And at the end of the 6 months, you're 30 games over 500, you're going to win. So, and again, I know one thing. I've watched games for a long time, and the teams that get hot in August and September, you'd be shocked of how many of those teams end up winning big. And that's what happened. And you run into those buzzsaws where everything's going right for them and nothing's going right for you guys. So, yeah, it could have been if the Mets could have won 1 or 2 of those games. I was at that series, as a matter of fact, in Atlanta, just because I wanted to be there to support Buck. And, yeah, I was as shocked as anybody. Again, once the Braves are playing good, they're sky high. Everything they believe about is positive. And the Mets were saying, Mike, the pressure's on us. The pressure's on us. And outside of a few of those guys, they were somewhat still young. McNeil was young, Alonso was still young, and so here they are, the first time dealing in a pressure-packed situation, and they learn from it. And that's how you grow as an organization and as a team. And yeah, it's tough, but there are. I mean, I wish I had an answer, and there are no answers. I mean, some of my best friends who were some of the great managers in the game have gone through tough times and lost games when they thought they should have won. And you know what you do? You got to prepare your team the next day. So, but I don't think that affected Buck's. What happened to Buck last year? If they would have stayed healthy a little bit, I think you'd see different results.
Yeah, I agree with you. Go ahead, Giant Smith Beaver.
Hi, Terry. It's a privilege to talk to you.
Thank you very much.
Terry, before I ask a question, I want to give a shout out to John. John and I have a friend in common, our mutual friend, Andrew, who tried to put us together get us connected down in Port St. Lucie this spring, and it didn't work out. But John, thanks for doing this. I'm excited for the podcast, and because I'm a huge Terry Collins fan, and one of the reasons that I'm such a big fan, Terry, is when you took over as manager, it was during a very dark time for an organization I've rooted for my whole life. It was tough times for the Mets when you took over, and you held that organization together. Some of the early years were tough years, but you never lost a team, and your teams never quit. And I'll always respect you for that, Terry, because it made it interesting. To the last out of the last game of every season, I follow the Mets, and it was a privilege for me as a fan to follow those teams. And then, I think you got your reward in 2015 for all that hard work. One thing about 2015, do you have a theory about what happened to Daniel Murphy in the postseason? He had never hit like that before, and I've always wanted some insight. What happened to him in that postseason?
Well, if you know Daniel Murphy, you know he's a baseball addict. Okay, he studies the game, he loves the game, he watches, he talks the game. So late in that season, and Dan was one of those kind of guys with great bat to ball skills. And I know that's a common phrase, but there are certain guys who can put the barrel of the bat on the baseball. And Dan was a guy who, he chased once in a while, and first pitches and hit some ground balls. But so our two hitting coaches, Kevin Long and Pat Russer, called Dan in late in the season, and they had put together this chart. And they said, Dan, here's this chart, and here's what you do when you hit the ball on the ground. And the numbers were horrible. And they said, here's what you do when you hit the ball in the air. And they were out dynamic. And Dan said, well, I guess I better start hitting the ball in the air. But because he had such a knowledge of how to do it, and he had no problem making an adjustment in his swing because he always had that bat to ball skills. And so he all of a sudden said, oh, I got to start getting the ball in the air more. And he became tremendous. Justin Turner did the same thing. He left New York and went and said, I got to learn how to. And he was another guy. He didn't strike out. Nor did Murph. Murph didn't strike out because they could make contact. They weren't afraid to hit the ball the other way because of their skills of handling the barrel of the bat. And so all of a sudden now, hey, I got to get the ball in the air a little bit more, hit it out in front a little bit more, and they both became hugely successful. But I credit the two coaches who took their time to bring this guy in and getting to buy into what they were talking about. And that's going to be the key at any time you coach somebody. The player has to buy into what you're saying. And Daniel Murphy was one of those guys who said, you know what, you're right, and I need to change my swing, and did.
Dan, go ahead, brother.
Terry, we talk about coaching these players, dominating performances, right? Goes around Twitter all the time. I see the picture. June 6th, 2017, there's a picture of you putting your arm around Jacob deGrom. He just allowed 8 runs in 4 innings pitched. against the Rangers. And ever since that picture was taken, it was a year and a half ago, probably still true, 2.12 ERA. Jacob deGrom, one of the best players we've ever seen. From your perspective, being around the Mets organization and seeing Jake and coaching Jake, how great was it? And what did you say in that exact moment?
Well, one of the things we realized, Jake came up and was absolutely brilliant. His competent way he pitched, the way he got about things. And you know what? To be honest, we can go back. He never failed. He didn't have really a horrible game that he could sit down and say, "Wow, that was a horrible outing." Well, he had one in Texas. And so I sat him down and said, "Hey, look, it happens. It's part of the game." And I said, "Jake, there are two kind of players in the big leagues. There are players who have failed, and there are players who are going to fail. We call it humble. There are players who have been humbled, and there are players who are going to be humbled." And I said, "Now you've got to grow from this." I said, "Make no mistake about it. In 4 days from now, you're back on the mound. So you got to forget about tonight and prepare yourself for your next start against your next opponent. Don't worry about don't sit there and study the tape of what happened tonight because it was one of those off nights. You better get ready for your next start." And that was it. And obviously, he became, in my opinion, arguably the best pitcher in the game for a long time. And I just
Right.
hope he gets back healthy and gets back on the mound.
All right, we got Michael, Petey, and Gina, and we'll close this thing out. Thank you guys so much for your time, John and Terry.
Coach, thank you so much for taking your time with us today. The teams that you coached were the ones that made me fall in love with baseball, watching it with my mom. So thank you so much for that. I hope you could comment on the managerial position today and how it's changed over the past few years. It seems like player or coaches are mainly looking at the computer to decide the decisions for them rather than just, the gut sense that the manager really has to have. Do you think that Mendoza is going to be able to really act as a good manager, or is he just going to be a computer guy? What do you think?
Well, first of all, listening to Carlos talk and talk to the players, I think he's got a great feel for communication. So that's number one. Secondly, yes, I think he's part of the thing today is the analytics are huge. They're growing in certain places. I do believe this. I do believe that it's going to go back a little bit to where the gut feel of the manager is going to come into it once in a while. But no, right now, a lot of guys, and I don't know what's going on any places. I haven't been involved that much in the last few years, but yeah, lineups are being written for managers today. Well, now your job is to make sure the guys in that lineup are ready to play. And by the way, the guys who are not in that lineup, they better be ready to help. You have those guys who, are playing every day and all of a sudden they're not in the lineup because the analytics people say, hey, this is a bad matchup. Well, guess what? You may need them in the seventh inning. So now your job is to make sure they're ready mentally, especially, and also physically, that they're ready to contribute. So, yeah, I think the managerial job has changed. But I think Carlos coming from the Yankees, who are very, very immensely analytic in the last few years, saw that, understands that an analytics side completely. But he also has a great feel for communication, and I listened to him what he said to the players and how he holds them accountable for things. So I think it might be a good blend, and obviously we won't know until the end of the season. But I think he's going to do a good job.
Thank you, Coach.
Go ahead, Petey.
Terry, two quick things again. Thanks again. This has been a great interview. I kind of want to jump through the phone. You're a guy that I could tell people. Terry, even when I used to shake your hand, I used to be at season ticket holder events. The
Yeah.
way you shook your hand and like jammed it at people. That's a command of respect, and I love that about you, Terry. My two quick points. One where I wanted to jump through to TV when Harvey drilled Utley when he had that bloody nose. I mean, I know you recall that game. Just we were tough, man. Like, and Harvey just brought that. Can you just explain that? And then I have one more thing. Were you at the last David Wright game? Because to me, that was one of the greatest moments of being at a Met game for me. I was so emotional with Reyes and I couldn't, man, Terry, I couldn't stop crying that night. That was one of the best games I've ever been at, and it was like a 13-inning game too. I recall. Were you there?
Yeah. Yeah, I was there.
All right,
Well, to
the
answer the first
Harvey
part of your
thing. Yeah,
question, Matt
thanks, Terry.
Harvey. Yeah, you bet. Matt Harvey was one of the great competitors when he first came to the big leagues, guys. his presence on the mound commanded respect. You know, he's 6'4", 235 pounds, 200. I mean, and attacked you. And so he took no BS from anybody. And Matt Harvey, or I mean Chase Utley. Chase Utley hit him pretty good. And I remember the first time, and I will tell you this is a true story. The first time Chase Utley ever faced Matt Harvey, I think John Buck might have been the catcher. And Utley came up and he said to John Buck, "Well, I've heard a lot about this. I can't wait to face this guy." Matt strikes him out on 5 pitches. Okay. And he's walking back to the dugout and he goes, okay, I get it. So, I mean, so here's a guy, one of the truly tough players in the game against, right now, a young guy who's going to be one of the toughest pitchers he's ever seen. And so when he hit Utley, I'll tell you what, I wasn't shocked at all, but we go back and Chase Utley's not one of my favorite people, but I'll tell you what, he handled it as a professional. He just moved on and moved ahead. And I will tell you, but Matt he sent a message. Hey, look, I'm not afraid of anybody. And I think that sent huge vibes through the entire, everybody in baseball that, hey, look, you got somebody out here to deal with. I forgot your second part of the question was what about?
The David Wright last game at City
David
Field.
Wright. Well, so that particular year, Brody Van Wagen had called me. I was doing some things for them. So he said, would you go down and watch David's game in St. Lucie on his final rehab game? And I said, yeah. So I lived down here. So I went out to the game and talked to him before the game, and he played his game, and he didn't do very well, but it was okay. He hadn't played in a while. And so I walked in and I saw the look on his face, and I could sense that he knew the end had come. So I went to the last game. I flew up to watch his last game. The tribute was off the charts great. Nobody deserved it more than him. And I've talked to him numerous times since. And one of the biggest thrills outside of having his daughter throw him the first pitch was to be on the field with Jose Reyes. And I truly believe those two guys they were foundational Mets players, great friends, respected each other's ability, and to this day, I'm sure they still communicate. And that was and I agree, one of my most emotional. And I was in the press box. I was up in one of the boxes with Michael Kadire, who's one of David's best friends, and Michael had tears in his eyes. It was so emotional, and it was great to be there. I still stay in contact with David, and he'll go down with arguably as the best player I ever had.
Terry, can I just real quick on that? And Jose was the first guy to say goodbye on the field. It was just Terry. I can't explain it. Like, I'm getting choked up now thinking about it. Just Reyes is like, all right, and you could tell even Reyes was emotional. Thanks for sharing that, Terry.
You bet.
All right, guys, we're going to finish it off with Gianna. I just want everybody to know that Gianna will be writing an article about this space, some of the quotes that were brought up in it. You can find all of those at metcastpod.com in our blog section where all of our articles are going. Gianna, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I'm super excited to write about this. Just one last question. Looking back on the 2015 season, obviously the week of the trade deadline was so emotional, and you had the rough Padres loss. Then you have obviously the iconic moment of Wilmer on the field, and then eventually we, trade for Cespedes. What was the emotions going through the clubhouse, and how did you kind of keep all the guys together in such a wild week?
John, I will tell you, it was, it wasn't just me. Everybody was having a tough time. I mean, the coaches, the players, but I will tell you, the front office did such a great job. I mean, when they started bringing guys in, be it Tyler Clippard, be it, Uribe, be it Kelly Johnson, guys in the clubhouse, all of a sudden they started feeling really good about themselves. Hey, look, the front office thinks we can win this thing. And when we finished that trade with Cespedes, I think that was even is that the day Wilmer hit the homer or the day before? It was right in that time. I mean, guys were sky high, but the Wilmer Flores situation, I thought, set a huge tone. His passion to be a New York Met sent volumes through the clubhouse. he wanted to be in New York Met. He didn't want to get traded, and the fact that the fans bought into his emotions on the field, the guys in the clubhouse, they said, "Oh my God, what a we can't be sitting here complaining about being being in New York. Maybe we're not playing as much as we want. This guy's dying to be a Met." I thought that sent a huge message to everybody. Hey, look, we're good enough. And so let's pull this thing all together. And I thought Wilmer's, obviously the home run when we won that game was huge. But everything during that time, even if we lost a tough game like the home run that Jerice gave up to Upton, I mean, guys weren't affected by it. You just saw, hey, look, we're going to win tomorrow. And that series, when we went down to Washington and we won those first two games, one in a huge comeback, I didn't think those. You looked at a look in those guys' faces, and the next day they walked out there. They didn't care if they were behind or not. They knew they were going to win. I mean, and all those things added to this confidence in this clubhouse that the organization thinks we can win. The fans think we can win. So by God, we think we can win. And I think it all added up to a great season.
Yeah, I couldn't
Terry,
agree more.
Terry John, it's been an honor. I want to hold you to the 1 hour. Appreciate it so much, guys. Follow them on their podcast because it's going to be insane. Some of the guests they're going to have and the stories that Terry and John are able to tell us. Couldn't
Yeah.
thank you guys enough.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you for asking us to do this, and I really appreciate Terry taking the time to do this. I have to tell you one thing. I mean, for me, being a Met fan since 1966 and living and dying with the team all these years, and now getting the opportunity to talk to Terry Collins every week on the show, it's just one of the most wonderful things that's ever happened in my life. And I think everybody who tunes into the Terry Collins show, there's going to be some wonderful stories, and I recommend everybody checking the show out tomorrow with Tom Hallion. And it's going to be an unbelievable episode. And I just want to thank everybody for being here tonight.
Thank you guys
Thanks,
once again.
thanks for having me.